The storm had already taken Elowen Marris's roof, half her winter hay, and the little apple tree her husband had planted the year they married. By morning, it looked ready to take what remained of her pride. Freezing rain swept sideways across the Montana mountains, turning the narrow road into a ribbon of black mud, while Elowen walked beside the last milk cow she owned, with one swollen hand wrapped around the animal's lead rope. She was 42 years old, widowed, exhausted, and so heavy that every uphill step pulled painfully at her knees. Her wet skirt slapped against her calves. Thick strands of chestnut hair had escaped the practical knot at the back of her head and stuck to her round cheeks. She had been walking for nearly 4 miles when she saw the first ranch hand leaning against the gate of Sorrell Ranch. He watched her come through the rain with an expression that changed slowly from confusion to amusement. Then he nudged the man beside him. "Well, would you look at that?" he said loudly enough for Elowen to hear. "Cow brought herself a cow." The second man laughed. Elowen stopped for half a heartbeat. She could have lowered her eyes. She could have pretended the rain had swallowed the words. She had spent half her life pretending not to hear such things. Instead, she tightened her hand around the rope and kept walking. She had no dry roof, almost no food left, and exactly $3.12 hidden in the hem of her dress. Hurt pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. The ranch spread across the mountain valley beneath a low ceiling of gray clouds. A long barn stood beside several smaller sheds, their roofs dark with rain. Beyond them, cattle moved like shadows through fenced pasture. Smoke curled from the chimney of a broad timber house near the creek. Elowen had never been this far north of her own homestead, though she knew the name Sorrell. Everyone did. Julian Sorrell had bought the ranch 8 years earlier, after some trouble nobody agreed on. Half the town said he had once worked cattle in Wyoming. The other half claimed he had been a scout, a gambler, a lawman, or a man running from a woman. The stories changed depending on who was telling them. The only thing people agreed on was that Julian kept mostly to himself and did not tolerate foolishness. Elowen reached the gate and looked at the 2 ranch hands. The older one was still smiling. "I need to speak with Mr. Sorrell." The man looked at her soaked clothes, then at the cow. "About what?" "That is between Mr. Sorrell and me." The younger ranch hand barked out another laugh. "Got some nerve on her." Elowen turned her gray-green eyes toward him. "I had more before I walked 4 miles in this weather." That quiet answer took some of the humor from his face. The older man straightened. "Boss is in the north barn." Elowen nodded once and passed through the gate. By the time she reached the barn, she was breathing hard. She hated that anyone could hear it. Her size had always announced itself before she had a chance to speak. Chairs creaked beneath her. Floorboards complained. Narrow store aisles seemed to shrink when she entered them. Men looked away too quickly, or stared too long. Women smiled with that careful softness Elowen had come to recognize as pity. She had grown skilled at occupying as little emotional space as possible, even when her body made the opposite unavoidable. Inside the barn, the air was warmer. It smelled of hay, damp leather, and animals. Several cows stood in their stalls. One coughed softly. Another shifted without interest toward a pile of feed. A man crouched beside a calf near the far wall. He was tall without seeming imposing, broad through the shoulders, dressed in a faded brown coat with the sleeves pushed back. Dark hair touched his collar. He had a lean, weathered face, and the kind of stillness Elowen associated with people who listened before they spoke. When he noticed her, he rose. "You Julian Sorrell?" "I am. My name is Elowen Marris." Something changed faintly in his eyes. "Marris, place up past Willow Pass." "Yes." "I heard the storm hit that ridge hard." "It did." He waited. Elowen hated asking for anything. Her late husband, Thomas, used to tease her that she would sooner carry a flour barrel up a hill than ask someone to carry a basket across a room. But Thomas had been dead for 3 years, and stubbornness did not repair roofs. She led the cow forward. "Her name is Clover. She gives good milk when she isn't frightened half to death. She's healthy, calm around children, never kicked anybody in her life." Julian looked at the cow, then back at Elowen. What are you asking? A week beneath a dry roof. Maybe 2. A place in the bunkhouse or barn loft. Doesn't matter. Food enough to keep me upright. In return, you take Clover. Julian's face did not move. No. Elowen felt the last fragile piece of her confidence crack. She's worth more than 2 weeks of shelter. I know. Then I don't understand. I don't want your cow. Behind her, one of the ranch hands had followed them inside. Elowen could feel his attention like heat between her shoulder blades. She lifted her chin. Mr. Sorrell, I am not asking for charity. I didn't say you were. Then what are you saying? Julian glanced toward the stalls. I'm saying I need somebody who understands cattle. Elowen almost laughed from exhaustion. You have a barn full of men. I have a barn full of men who think understanding cattle means knowing how to rope one. The ranch hand behind her muttered, We heard that. Julian ignored him. He walked to a stall and rested his palm along the neck of a thin heifer. Lost 4 this month. 7 more are weakening. Vet says parasites. We treated them. Didn't help. Changed hay twice. Didn't help. Something is wrong. Elowen looked at the cow. Years of farm life sharpened her tired gaze. How long has she been on this feed? 3 weeks. Elowen stepped closer. The heifer's ribs showed more than they should. Her coat was rough. She sniffed the trough and turned away. Elowen dipped 2 fingers into the feed. Where did this come from? Southfield. All of it? Mostly. She crushed a little between her fingers. Show me the field. The ranch hand behind her gave a disbelieving snort. Boss, you serious? She can barely make it across the yard. Elowen looked back. The man was young, perhaps 25, with red hair beneath his hat. What's your name? He hesitated. Cal. Cal, I walked here from Willow Pass in freezing rain. If I can make it across your yard, I'll try very hard not to inconvenience you. Julian's mouth moved slightly. It might have been the beginning of a smile. Cal looked annoyed. Julian took his coat from a hook. Show her the south field. Elowen had expected humiliation when she arrived. She had not expected employment. An hour later, the rain had weakened to a cold mist. Elowen stood at the edge of the south pasture, while Cal and Julian waited several steps behind her. The field sloped toward a low marshy area near the creek. Most of the grass looked ordinary, but the livestock had grazed some sections almost bare, while leaving strange patches untouched. Elowen bent slowly. Pain ran through her knees. Cal watched. You need a hand getting back up? The kindness in the question might have been sincere, but his grin ruined it. No. She examined the plants. Then she moved 20 feet farther down. Your cattle used to rotate through the west pasture before this one. Julian nodded. How'd you know? The manure. Cal frowned. The what? The manure, Cal. Cows don't write letters. Julian's mouth definitely twitched this time. Elowen pointed toward the slope. You moved this herd too early. Ground here stayed wet after spring runoff. See the pale grass mixed along the lower strip. Julian crouched. Looks like sedge. Some is, some isn't. She pulled a weed carefully by the stem. Water hemlock. Cal stopped smiling. Julian's eyes sharpened. Enough to kill them. Not quickly, with what they're eating, but enough to make weak cattle weaker. That's not all. She stood with effort and moved toward the fence. Who set these mineral blocks? Cal answered more quietly. I did. How many head? 72. 2 blocks aren't enough, especially with wet forage. Cal stared at the pasture, as if it had personally betrayed him. Elowen looked at Julian. Your feed isn't one problem. It's 4 small ones working together. Poor rotation, mineral shortage, contaminated grazing, and I would wager your south storage shed is damp. It is, Julian said. Then your grain may be spoiling before it reaches the trough. Julian studied her. How long would it take you to know? 2 days. I'll pay you for a week. Elowen blinked. For what? Fix it. She looked down at Clover. I offered you the cow. And I told you no. I don't take charity. Julian stepped closer, though not so close that she felt crowded. Neither do I. His voice was quiet. I pay people who know more than I do. For one strange moment, Elowen did not know what to say. Nobody had spoken to her that way in years. Not since Thomas. She looked toward the distant ranch house. Where would I stay? There's a room off the kitchen. Small but dry. Food? Same as everyone else. Wages? Julian named a number. Elowen stared at him. That's too much. It's less than 4 dead cows. Cal scratched his neck. Boss, you really hiring her? Julian looked at him. Did you know there was hemlock in that field? No. Did she? Cal's face reddened. Yes. Then I guess I am. That evening, Elowen slept beneath a sound roof, for the first time since the storm. She lay awake anyway. The room was narrow, with whitewashed walls, a washstand, and a small bed that groaned when she lowered herself onto it. Rain tapped against the window. Somewhere beyond the wall, men laughed over supper. Elowen stared at the ceiling and thought about her ruined cabin. She saw the roof tearing away in the storm. She saw rain pouring across Thomas's old table. She saw the shelf where their wedding photograph had stood, collapsing beneath soaked plaster. Most of all, she remembered the silence afterward. A house could sound painfully empty when only one person remained inside it. She turned onto her side. The bed creaked. She closed her eyes. 2 weeks, she whispered. She would earn enough to buy timber. She would go home. Nothing more. By the 3rd day, 3 of Julian's sick cattle were eating better. By the 5th, none had worsened. Elowen had the damp grain hauled out and spread for inspection. She changed the rotation pattern, ordered fences moved around the poison section, adjusted salt and mineral distribution, and found mold growing beneath several feed bins where rainwater had entered through warped boards. At first, the men treated her instructions like suggestions. Then Julian made something clear. When Mrs. Marris tells you to move cattle, you move cattle. After that, they listened. Not gladly. Not always respectfully, but they listened. Cal remained the loudest. One morning, Elowen climbed onto a wagon seat beside him so they could inspect the west pasture. The springs sank sharply beneath her weight. Cal stared at the wagon. Hope we don't break an axle. The other men laughed. Elowen's face grew hot. She looked straight ahead. Cal added, might need another team. The laughter grew. Julian came out of the barn. He stopped. Nobody noticed him at first. Then the laughter died. Julian looked at Cal. You worried about that axle? Cal swallowed. Just joking. Then you'll walk. Cal blinked. What? Mrs. Marris rides. You walk. It's 6 miles. Then you'll have plenty of time to think of something funnier. Elowen looked down. She did not smile. She was grateful, but gratitude felt dangerous. A person could become hungry for simple decency after living too long without it. That afternoon, Cal arrived at the west pasture, muddy, exhausted, and quiet. He never made another joke about her weight. Other men did, though mostly beyond Elowen's hearing. Mostly, she learned the shape of ranch life. Dawn came early, coffee came strong, horses kicked stall doors when hungry, cattle ignored fences built by tired men. Boots were always muddy. Somebody was always repairing something. Elowen liked it. Work had never frightened her. Her body tired more quickly than it once had, but she knew how to pace herself. She sat when she needed to sit. She used carts instead of carrying what could be rolled. She rested her aching knees at midday. Nobody had taught her that taking care of herself could exist beside hard work. Thomas had tried. You don't have to prove you're useful every minute, he once told her. At the time, she had laughed. Now she understood. Julian rarely praised her. He simply trusted her. That meant more. One evening, she found him repairing harness leather beneath the barn lantern. Your heifer in stall 8 should be back with the herd tomorrow. Julian nodded. Good. And the calf beside her is eating. Good. Elowen waited. Julian looked up. Something else? She folded her arms. Do you ever say more than one word? Sometimes. That was one. He stared at her. Then he smiled. It changed his whole face. Elowen felt something inside her shift so unexpectedly that she became annoyed with herself. You think you're funny. No, that's worse. He returned to the harness. You were right about the feed. That's 3 more words than usual. Don't get spoiled. She laughed. It surprised both of them. For several weeks, life almost became peaceful. Then, Elowen went into town. She needed nails, lamp oil, thread, and a new pair of work gloves. Julian offered to send Cal. I am capable of buying gloves. I know. Then why are you looking at me like that? Julian leaned against the porch rail. Town's been talking. Elowen's stomach tightened. Town always talks. Not always kindly. It has never needed your permission. He looked as if he wanted to say something else. Instead, he nodded. Take the small wagon. Elowen reached town before noon. Larkspur was little more than 2 muddy streets, a church, a hotel, a feed store, a blacksmith, and several houses gathered around the courthouse. She had known people there for 12 years. That was why the first silence hurt. 2 women stood outside the mercantile, Margaret Bell and Susan Pike. Both had eaten at Elowen's table after Thomas died. Both had held her while she cried. Margaret saw her first. Her expression froze. Susan followed her gaze. Elowen smiled. Morning. Margaret touched Susan's arm. We should go. They crossed the street. Elowen stood beside the hitching post with the wagon reins still in her hand. For a moment, she wondered if she had imagined it. Then she entered the store. Mr. Fenwick stood behind the counter. His wife usually greeted Elowen warmly. Today, Mrs. Fenwick remained in the back room. Elowen placed her list on the counter. I need these, please. Fenwick read it. Nails, thread, gloves, and lamp oil. He began collecting the items. Elowen noticed another customer watching her, a thin woman in a blue bonnet. Elowen knew her by sight but not name. The woman whispered something to her daughter. The daughter looked at Elowen and giggled. Fenwick returned with the gloves. These are men's. They fit. They're the largest I have. I know. He placed them down. Something in his tone carried a small blade. Elowen met his eyes. Is there a problem, Mr. Fenwick? No problem. He wrapped the gloves. I just imagine Mr. Sorrell can afford whatever you require these days. The woman in the bonnet turned away to hide a smile. Elowen felt cold. My money is mine. Of course. Fenwick's expression remained pleasant. Folks were simply surprised. By what? Your arrangement. My employment, if that's what you're calling it. The store seemed to become very quiet. Elowen's cheeks burned. What exactly are you suggesting? Fenwick lifted both palms. I'm suggesting nothing. Then say, nothing. The words came out more firmly than she felt. She paid and left. Outside, Margaret and Susan were standing farther down the street. Elowen walked toward them. Susan looked nervous. Margaret looked guilty. What is being said? Elowen asked. Margaret sighed. Elowen. What? It isn't worth repeating. It was worth listening to. Susan looked down. Margaret spoke. People think Julian Sorrell is unusually generous with you. Elowen stared. Because he hired me. Because he took you in. My roof was destroyed. We know. Do you? Margaret's face tightened. There is no reason to become angry. Then tell me the joke. What? Everybody seems to know it, except me. Susan touched Elowen's arm. Some people think you are trying to attach yourself to him. Elowen pulled her arm away. Attach myself. No one who matters believes it. Do you? Susan did not answer quickly enough. That small pause hurt more than Fenwick's words. Elowen nodded. I see, Margaret said softly. People simply wonder why a man like Julian would take such an interest in a woman like... She stopped. Elowen's eyes locked on hers. A woman like what? Margaret looked miserable. Don't make me say it. Say it. Elowen, say it. Margaret lowered her voice. A woman of your size. The street disappeared for a moment. Not literally, but Elowen stopped hearing the horses, wagons, and people around her. Margaret continued quickly. They think perhaps he feels sorry for you. And the other version? What? You said people. Susan spoke this time. Some say you're using his pity. Elowen breathed in, slowly. What else? Nobody answered. She looked at them. What else? Margaret whispered. Someone said no unmarried man would keep a woman under his roof without wanting something. Elowen went still. Susan said, We told them that was cruel. After you listened. Elowen, please. She stepped away. She could not stand there 1 second longer. She returned to the wagon but found she could not make her hands work properly around the reins. People were looking. She could feel it. Perhaps they had always looked. Perhaps she had simply become tired enough to notice. She walked behind the feed store. There was an empty storage room with a broken latch. She stepped inside. The room smelled of grain dust and old wood. She closed the door. Then Elowen Marris, who had buried a husband, survived 3 winters alone, delivered calves in snow, cut firewood with fever, and walked 4 miles through a mountain storm beside a cow, leaned against a stack of empty feed sacks and broke. She covered her mouth with both hands because she could not bear the thought of anyone hearing. Her shoulders shook. The first tears were angry, the next were not. She cried for the years of jokes, for every chair someone had moved before she sat down, for every woman who had given her advice about food without being asked, for every man who treated kindness toward her as something heroic, for every mirror she had avoided, for Thomas, who used to kiss her cheek when she was flour-covered and tired and tell her she looked beautiful, for the stupid hope that perhaps after all these years, people had finally grown kinder. Most of all, she cried because Margaret and Susan had known her. They had eaten her bread. They had slept beneath her roof. And still, when someone reduced Elowen to the size of her body, they had not defended her strongly enough to make it costly. She stayed there until there were no more tears. Then she washed her face at the public pump, climbed onto the wagon, and returned to the ranch. Julian was repairing a fence when she arrived. He looked up. Elowen tried to smile. "Got your nails?" His eyes rested on her swollen face. He said nothing. That almost broke her again. She unloaded the supplies. Julian took the heavy crate without asking. Elowen waited for the question. It never came. Instead, he said, "Kitchen stove still warm." "I ate." He looked at her. She sighed. "I didn't. There's stew. I am capable of serving myself." "I know." She looked at him sharply. He was not smiling. Neither was she. Something softened in her chest anyway. That evening, when Elowen entered the kitchen, there was a bowl covered beside the stove. No note, no pity, just food kept warm. She sat alone at the table and ate slowly. The next morning, she returned to work. That was how Elowen survived most things. She returned to work, but the town's cruelty had left a crack behind. Through that crack, other things began to show. The first was a rider. She noticed him one afternoon while checking the cattle near the North Ridge. He stood on horseback almost a mile away, just below the tree line, watching. When Elowen turned toward him, he rode off. She told Julian. "What did he look like?" "Gray coat, dark horse." "Know him?" "No." Julian frowned. "Could be a hunter." "Could be." Neither believed it. 2 days later, Elowen returned to her homestead for the first time since the storm. Julian went with her. She told herself it was because the road was difficult. He did not pretend otherwise. The Marris cabin looked smaller than she remembered. Half the roof was gone. One wall leaned outward. Fallen pine branches covered the garden. The barn had lost 2 doors. Elowen stood beside the wagon. Julian waited. She did not move. "This was my whole life," she said. "It still is." She looked at him. "Doesn't look much like one. Wood's easier to replace than a life." She swallowed. "Thomas built that wall." Julian followed her gaze. "He built it straight." "No." "Then maybe don't copy everything." Elowen laughed before she could stop herself. "That was terrible. I've been told." Inside, the cabin smelled of damp timber. Elowen moved carefully through the wreckage. She found Thomas's chair beneath a fallen section of ceiling. One leg was broken. She touched the back. Julian walked outside without speaking. He understood that some grief needed privacy. Elowen entered the small bedroom. Her old land chest remained beneath the bed. She pulled it free. Inside were tax receipts, survey maps, Thomas's notebooks, and the leather ledger where he had recorded nearly every improvement made to the property. Elowen opened it. Several pages had been torn out. She stared. "Julian," he returned quickly. "What?" She held up the ledger. "Pages are missing." "Storm?" "No. The binding is cut." Julian crouched beside her. The missing pages had been removed cleanly. Know what was on them? Water records. His gaze lifted. "What kind?" The spring. Behind the cabin, beneath an old stand of fir trees, a cold mountain spring emerged from rock and fed a narrow creek down toward the valley. Thomas called it Marris Spring. During dry summers, cattle from 3 neighboring properties depended on runoff that crossed their grazing routes. Elowen had never considered the spring valuable. It was simply water. But Julian's expression changed. "Who knows those pages exist? Anybody who's ever seen our property filings? Who has? County clerk? Surveyor? Maybe the bank?" Julian looked toward the broken doorway. "You sure nobody came here after the storm?" "I was here 2 days before I left." "Anything moved?" Elowen looked around. At first, nothing. Then she noticed the north window. The trunk. What? It used to be under that window. An old storage trunk had been shifted several feet. Someone had searched the room. Julian stood. "Don't touch anything else." Elowen felt irritation rise. "It's my house." "I know. Then don't order me around in it." He looked at her. "Fair." She softened slightly. "What are you thinking?" "Somebody was looking for something. So am I. Difference is, you own the place." Outside, they walked the northern boundary. Thomas had marked the property with cedar posts years earlier. Elowen knew most of them by memory. At the far ridge, she stopped. "This is wrong." Julian looked at the post. "What?" "It should be near that boulder." The marker stood almost 60 yards farther inward. Julian walked to the boulder. The soil nearby had been disturbed. He knelt. "Old post hole." Elowen stared at the new marker. "Someone moved my boundary." The words sounded absurd. Julian rose. "Looks that way." "Why?" He looked downhill. The shifted line cut directly toward Marris Spring. Elowen understood. A cold feeling moved through her. Someone wants the water. Back in town, the county clerk smiled too quickly when Elowen entered his office. His name was Samuel Dorr. He had served as clerk for 14 years. Thomas trusted him. Elowen had trusted him too. "Mrs. Marris, good to see you recovering. I need the original survey for my property." Dorr adjusted his glasses. "Certainly." He disappeared into the records room. Julian waited near the door. Several minutes passed. Dorr returned carrying a folder. "Here we are." Elowen opened it. The survey showed the boundary exactly where the new marker stood. Her heart pounded. "This isn't the original." Dorr blinked. "Beg pardon?" "This line is wrong. That is the county record. My husband and I bought 80 acres. This removes almost 12. Dorr smiled faintly. "Perhaps you misunderstood the original purchase. I signed it. People misremember." Elowen stared at him. "My husband did not." Dorr's smile faded. "Thomas has been gone 3 years." Julian stepped forward. "Careful." Dorr looked at him. "I'm merely explaining the document." Elowen turned another page. Something else caught her eye. A lien. She read it twice. "What is this?" Dorr looked. "Outstanding debt. To whom?" "Barlow Land and Cattle." Elowen knew the name. Everyone did. Gideon Barlow owned more land than anyone in the county. He sat in the front pew at church, funded school repairs, lent money to struggling ranchers, and smiled in every photograph printed by the local newspaper. Elowen had met him perhaps 6 times. He had always called her Mrs. Marris with perfect courtesy. "I have never borrowed money from Gideon Barlow." Dorr pointed to a signature. "Your husband did." Elowen looked down. "Thomas Marris." The handwriting resembled his. Almost. But Thomas formed his M with a long downward stroke. This one did not. "That's forged." Dorr's face hardened. "That is a serious accusation." "It's also true. You may wish to speak with an attorney." I may wish to speak with a judge. Door closed the folder. Until then, those are the county records. Outside, Elowen stood on the courthouse steps, breathing hard. Julian said nothing. She turned toward him. 12 acres. Looks that way. And a debt that doesn't exist. Yes. Why? Julian looked across the street. Gideon Barlow's lawyer's office stood there. I think you already know. The mystery spread quietly. Elowen began asking questions. Most people refused to answer. A banker remembered nothing. A former survey assistant had moved to Idaho. One rancher told her privately that Thomas had once complained about pressure to sell water access. Another immediately denied ever saying it when Elowen mentioned recording his statement. Fear lived beneath the town's polite surface. She could feel it now. Then came the letter. It arrived at the ranch without postage. Cal found it nailed to the barn door. Julian opened it first. Elowen took it from him. Leave the Marris property behind. You abandoned it once. Do not make trouble over land you cannot manage. She read it twice. The words that hurt were not the threat. They were the last 4. Land you cannot manage. She knew exactly what they meant. Not simply widow, not simply poor. They meant heavy, slow, alone, easy to dismiss. Julian took the paper. They're getting nervous. I'm getting angry. Good. Elowen looked at him. You don't sound worried. I am. Then why say good? Fear makes people hide. He folded the letter carefully. Anger makes them look. The next morning, Elowen went looking. She started with Thomas's old ledger. The missing pages mattered because Thomas rarely recorded anything only once. He kept scraps, receipts, notes, maps. For 3 days, she searched. On the 4th, she found something hidden inside the back cover of his Bible. A narrow strip of paper. 3 names. Hannah Weller, Isaac Greeley, Jonas Pike. Elowen recognized only one. Hannah Weller lived alone beyond Cedar Hollow. She was 76 years old and had lost her farm nearly 15 years earlier. People said she had failed to pay taxes. Elowen and Julian rode to see her. Hannah opened the door, carrying a shotgun. State your business. Elowen raised both hands. My name is Elowen Marris. Hannah studied her. Then her gaze changed. Thomas's widow. Yes. Hannah lowered the gun. Come in. Her cabin was small and warm. Bundles of herbs hung from the rafters. Hannah poured coffee without asking. When Elowen placed Thomas's paper on the table, the old woman's face went pale. Where did you get that? His Bible. Hannah touched her own name. He remembered. Remembered what? Hannah sat slowly. My land. Elowen leaned forward. What happened? Same thing that's happening to yours. Silence filled the room. Hannah looked toward the window. My husband died in '69. 2 years later, County told me I owed money on a loan I'd never taken. I protested. Records showed his signature. Was it real? Looked real enough to everyone who wanted it to be. Elowen's stomach twisted. What happened then? They took 40 acres. Who? Company had a different name then. Hannah looked at her. But Gideon Barlow was behind it. Julian spoke. You sure? I watched his cattle drinking from my creek 6 months later. Hannah's mouth tightened. They told everybody I was confused, grieving, too old to understand papers. Elowen felt something cold and familiar. They made you sound incapable. That is how men steal from women without dirtying their hands. Hannah studied her. They don't begin with the land. They begin with your name. They make people doubt you. Once nobody believes you, the paper can say anything. Elowen thought about the store, the whispers. Margaret, Susan, the jokes. Her chest tightened. The rumors. Hannah nodded slowly. People protect respectable men, especially from women they've already decided not to respect. For the first time, Elowen understood the full shape of what was happening. The cruelty was not separate from the theft. It was part of it. If the town believed she was foolish, desperate, manipulative, or dependent on Julian, then every protest she made could be dismissed as another embarrassing performance from a woman who did not know her place. The humiliation was useful. That realization hurt worse than the insults themselves. On the ride home, Elowen barely spoke. Near sunset, Julian stopped beside a creek. "You're quiet." "I am thinking." "About?" "How easy it was." Julian waited. "They didn't have to silence me," Elowen said. "They only had to make everyone embarrassed to stand beside me." Her eyes filled. She hated that. She turned her face away. Julian dismounted. He did not touch her. He simply stood nearby. Elowen laughed once, bitterly. "Do you know what Margaret Bell said? She said people wondered why a man like you would help a woman like me." Julian's jaw tightened. "I know." She looked at him. "How?" "Cal heard it in town." "And you said nothing? You didn't ask me to fight your neighbors." Elowen stared at the creek. "Maybe I wanted you to. Maybe." He leaned against a tree. "But if I walked into town punching every fool who insulted you, they'd spend the next 10 years telling the story of how Julian Sorrell defended poor Elowen Marris." She looked at him. "I hate when you're right." "So do I." She almost smiled. Then her face crumpled. "I am tired, Julian." His expression softened. "I know." "No. I mean tired in a way sleep doesn't fix." Her voice shook. "I am tired of entering a room and knowing my body got there before I did. I'm tired of people deciding I am lazy before they see my hands. I'm tired of kindness feeling like a favor. I'm tired of wondering whether every chair will hold me. I'm tired of women looking at my plate. I'm tired of men thinking they deserve praise for speaking to me like I am human." Tears slipped down her cheeks. Julian listened. She continued. "And now, I find out that being easy to ridicule made me easy to rob." Julian looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "They were wrong." Elowen wiped her face. "About what?" "Easy." One word. That was all. But it stayed with her. They found Isaac Greeley next. He had died 6 years earlier. His daughter, Ruth, still had his records. The same pattern appeared: a sudden debt, a changed survey, a valuable water route, a county record amended after the owner's death. Ruth had spent years believing her father had lied about money. When Elowen showed her Hannah Weller's documents, Ruth began crying at the kitchen table. "He kept saying there was no loan." "There wasn't. I thought he was ashamed." "He wasn't." Ruth pressed both hands over her face. "I let him die thinking I didn't believe him." Elowen moved beside her. "You believed the papers. I believed everyone. That was the trick." Ruth lowered her hands. "You think Barlow did this? I think someone did. Be careful. Everyone keeps telling me that. They should." Ruth opened a drawer. "My father kept one thing." She removed a folded survey map. In the lower corner was a surveyor's seal. Elowen recognized the name. Walter Creed, the same man listed on the revised Marris survey. Julian saw it too. "Still alive?" Ruth nodded. "Last I heard, he lives outside Helena." That journey took 4 days. Elowen insisted on going. Julian did not argue. Walter Creed was dying. They found him in a boarding room above a saloon, thin beneath blankets, his hands shaking from illness. At first, he denied everything. Then Elowen placed 3 surveys on his bed. Hannah's, Isaac's, hers. Creed stared at them. "Get out." "No." His eyes flashed. "I said leave." Elowen remained seated. "My husband is dead. So are many men. Did you forge his survey?" Creed looked away. "Answer me. I don't owe you anything." Elowen leaned closer. "You owe Hannah Weller 15 years. His jaw tightened. "You owe Isaac Greeley his daughter's trust." Creed shut his eyes. "And you owe me 12 acres, and every night I've spent wondering whether someone is coming to take the rest." Silence. Julian stood near the window. He had not spoken once. Creed looked at Elowen. "You think I started it. I think you helped." His face collapsed. "Barlow paid me." There it was. Simple. Ugly. Real. Creed began talking. At first slowly, then faster. Gideon Barlow had built much of his fortune not by buying land, but by making ownership difficult to prove. Widows, older farmers, immigrants who spoke little English, families with disputed inheritance, men injured and unable to work. People unlikely to afford lawyers. People the town found easy to dismiss. Creed altered surveys. Samuel Dorr changed county copies. A banker named Pritchard manufactured liens. Barlow purchased the land when owners supposedly defaulted. Most properties contained water. Others controlled access roads or grazing passes. How many? Elowen asked. Creed stared at the ceiling. 23. Julian swore quietly. Can you prove it? Creed laughed weakly. You think men like Barlow trust each other? He pointed toward a trunk. Bottom. Julian opened it. Inside was a packet of letters. Payment instructions. Survey numbers. Names. Dates. Elowen's hands shook as she read them. Then she saw Thomas Marris. Her breath stopped. One letter was dated 4 years earlier, a year before Thomas died. Creed had written to Barlow. Marris refuses sale. He suspects water route is reason. Recommend delay until widow holds property alone. Elowen sat very still. Julian stepped toward her. She held up one hand. Not yet. She read it again. Until widow holds property alone. Thomas had known. Perhaps not everything, but enough. He had been trying to protect her. The missing pages were not random. Someone had waited. Watched. Then the storm gave them exactly what they needed. An abandoned-looking homestead. A poor widow gone from the property. A chance to finish what had begun years earlier. Walter Creed gave a sworn statement before a local magistrate the next morning. Julian paid a lawyer to make certain every page was properly witnessed. Elowen protested. I will repay you. Fine. Every dollar. Fine. With interest. Julian looked at her. Now you're being unreasonable. She almost laughed. The legal battle moved quickly after that. Not because justice had suddenly become brave. Because evidence was difficult to ignore once it became dangerous to deny. Gideon Barlow hired 2 attorneys. Samuel Dorr claimed clerical mistakes. Banker Pritchard became ill and disappeared for 3 days before a deputy found him at a rail station. The town changed too. People who had avoided Elowen began greeting her again. She hated that almost as much as the silence. Margaret Bell appeared at the ranch one afternoon. Elowen found her standing near the barn. I came to apologize. Elowen kept sorting invoices. For which part? Margaret flinched. All of it. That may take a while. I deserve that. Elowen looked at her. Margaret's eyes were wet. I should have defended you. Yes. I was afraid people would turn on me. They might have. I know. Elowen set down the papers. Margaret whispered, I was a coward. Elowen studied the woman she had once considered a close friend. Forgiveness did not arrive like warmth. It arrived like a door she was not yet ready to open. I believe you're sorry. Margaret nodded. Thank you. I did not say I forgive you. Margaret's face fell. Elowen continued quietly. But perhaps someday. That was all she could offer honestly. Margaret accepted it. The hearing was scheduled for October. By then, autumn had turned the mountains gold and copper. Elowen's cabin was being repaired. Julian's men volunteered on Sundays. Cal worked harder than anybody. One afternoon, he carried shingles up a ladder, while Elowen stood below. You know, he called down, I was an idiot when you got here. Elowen looked up. When? He laughed. Fair. She handed him another bundle. I thought you wouldn't last 2 days. So did I. He paused. That joke I made at the gate. I remember. I know. Cal looked embarrassed. I'm sorry. Elowen studied him. Why? Because it was cruel. Anything else? He thought. Because I didn't know you. Elowen nodded. That's closer. The day before the hearing, Julian drove Elowen to her cabin. The new roof was finished. Windows repaired. Chimney rebuilt. The crooked wall Thomas had built remained crooked. Elowen had insisted. She stood in the doorway. It looks like home again. Julian rested one shoulder against the frame. It is home. She turned. You keep saying that. Because you keep forgetting. The air between them changed. Softly. Dangerously. Elowen looked away. Julian. People are still talking. I know. They'll say things if you keep coming here. They already say things. That doesn't bother you? No, it bothers me. He became quiet. Elowen struggled to explain. I don't want people thinking I survived because you wanted me. Julian nodded. They won't. You can't know that. No. He stepped closer. But I know something else. No. What? I didn't save your land. She looked at him. You found the names. You found Hannah. You followed Thomas's records. You sat across from Creed until he confessed. You brought the case. His voice was low. I drove a wagon. You did more than that. Not the part that matters. Her throat tightened. Julian looked toward the repaired roof. Tomorrow, when you walk into that hearing, I won't sit beside you. Elowen frowned. Why? I'll sit behind you. She understood. Her eyes filled. You thought about this? Some. That's dangerous. So I've heard. She laughed softly. Then Julian lifted one hand. He stopped before touching her. May I? Elowen's breath caught. No man had asked like that. Not as if permission mattered. She nodded. His fingers brushed a loose strand of chestnut hair from her cheek. That was all. No kiss. No grand declaration. Just a gentle touch. Elowen closed her eyes. For years, she had believed love would arrive only if she somehow changed first. Smaller body, quieter needs, less trouble, less Elowen. Julian's hand fell away. Nothing about her had become smaller, yet he looked at her as if she took up exactly the right amount of space. The county hearing began beneath a hard blue morning sky. Nearly every seat inside the courthouse was filled. People stood along the walls. Some had come because they cared. Most had come because scandal was more interesting than work. Gideon Barlow sat beside his lawyers at the front. He wore a dark suit and silver watch chain. His hair was perfectly combed. He looked exactly like the kind of man people trusted. When Elowen entered, whispers moved through the room. She heard one woman say, "That's her." Another murmured, "She looks nervous." Elowen was nervous. Her hands trembled. Her stomach felt hollow. She wore her best brown dress, carefully repaired at the cuffs. Her chestnut hair was pinned neatly back. She had considered buying something new, then decided she did not need a costume to tell the truth. Julian sat 3 rows behind her, not beside her, behind. Just as he promised, the judge entered. Everyone rose. The hearing began. Barlow's attorney spoke first. He was polished, calm. He described the matter as an unfortunate dispute caused by poor record-keeping and grief. He called Elowen confused twice. The second time, she almost smiled. There it was. The old trick, make her unreliable before discussing what she knew. When Elowen's attorney stood, he did something unexpected. He called Elowen first. She walked to the witness chair. The room seemed enormous from there. The judge asked her name. Elowen Marris. Occupation? She paused. Farmer. A whisper moved through the room. Not widow, not dependent. Farmer. Her attorney approached. Mrs. Marris, when did you purchase your property? 12 years ago, with my husband, Thomas. How many acres? 80. How do you know? Because I signed the original deed. Is this the deed? He handed her the document. She read it. Yes. Does the current county survey reflect 80 acres? No. How many? Approximately 68. What is missing? The northern tract containing Marris Spring. The attorney introduced Thomas's records. Then Hannah Weller's. Then Isaac Greeley's. Then the others. One by one. Same altered boundaries. Same false debts. Same signatures. Same surveyor. Same clerk. Same bank. Finally, Walter Creed's sworn confession. The courtroom became very quiet. Barlow no longer smiled. His attorney objected repeatedly. The judge allowed most of the evidence. Then came the letters. Elowen watched Barlow's face when his own handwriting was read aloud. Payment after amendment is entered. Acquire water tract through lien. Widow unlikely to contest. That sentence hung in the courtroom. Widow unlikely to contest. Elowen looked toward the benches. Margaret was there. Susan too, Mr. Fenwick. People who had laughed. People who had whispered. People who had believed that the easiest explanation for Julian's kindness was pity. Now they watched her. Elowen felt something surprising. She did not want revenge in the way she once imagined. She did not want them humiliated. She wanted them awake. Her attorney asked one final question. Mrs. Marris, why did you continue investigating after being warned to stop? Elowen looked at Gideon Barlow, then at the judge. Because they expected me not to. The attorney waited. Elowen continued. They expected me to be ashamed. Her voice remained steady. They expected people to think I was foolish. They expected my neighbors to believe that because I am a large woman living alone, I must be helpless, desperate, or grateful for any man willing to stand near me. Nobody moved. They used that. Her throat tightened. But I wasn't the first. She looked toward Hannah Weller. They took land from people who were old, poor, grieving, alone, or simply easy to dismiss. Hannah's eyes filled. Elowen looked back at the judge. They counted on our embarrassment doing their work for them. Barlow's attorney stood. Objection! The judge lifted a hand. Sit down! The attorney sat. Elowen continued. My husband knew someone wanted our spring. He left records because he believed truth mattered. Hannah kept hers because she knew she had not imagined what happened. Ruth Greeley kept her father's survey because some part of her still hoped he had been telling the truth. Her hands no longer shook. I am not asking this court to feel sorry for me. She turned slightly. Her eyes passed over the room. I have had enough pity. Then she looked directly at Gideon Barlow. I am asking you to read the papers. That was the moment the room changed. Not loudly. No one gasped. No music played. But the old story people had told about Elowen Marris died quietly in that courtroom. She was not Julian Sorrell's poor widow. She was not the lonely, heavy woman who had manipulated her way beneath a man's roof. She was not foolish, not confused, not helpless. She was the person who had followed the records everyone else preferred to ignore. The ruling took 3 days. Gideon Barlow's claim against the Marris property was voided. The altered survey was rejected. The false lien was removed. A criminal investigation opened into fraud, forgery, and conspiracy involving Barlow, Dorr, and Pritchard. 7 other property disputes were reopened immediately. More followed. Hannah Weller recovered part of her former land. Ruth Greeley received compensation from the estate that had purchased her father's property through the false lien. Families who had spent years blaming dead parents discovered that those parents had not failed them. They had been cheated. Gideon Barlow did not lose everything overnight. Real life was slower than that. Lawyers argued. Assets froze. Trials were scheduled. But his reputation collapsed in a week. People who once crossed the street to shake his hand began crossing the street to avoid him. Elowen watched it happen without satisfaction. There was something sad about how quickly respect could move from one person to another when people feared being seen on the wrong side. Mr. Fenwick apologized. Susan apologized. The newspaper printed Elowen's testimony. Someone called her brave. She disliked the word. She had been afraid nearly every day. Perhaps that was what bravery actually was. Not the absence of fear, just refusing to let fear choose the direction. By November, snow covered the mountains. Elowen moved home. Julian helped carry the final box into her cabin. Clover returned with her. The cow seemed unimpressed by everything. Elowen stood in the kitchen. Thomas's old table had been repaired. The chair with the broken leg stood beside it. The crooked wall remained. New timber crossed the ceiling where the storm had torn everything open. Elowen touched one of the fresh beams. She ran her rough palm along the wood. Then she started crying. Not quietly, not politely, not with one hand covering her mouth. The tears came hard enough to bend her forward. Julian stopped near the doorway. Elowen? She shook her head. I'm all right. You don't look all right. I know. She laughed through the tears. That's the strange part. Julian waited. Elowen pressed both palms against the timber. I thought I lost it. Her voice broke. After the storm, I stood right here with rain coming through the ceiling, and I thought that was the end. Julian remained silent. I thought I had lost Thomas again. She wiped her cheeks. I thought losing the house meant losing the life we built. Her eyes moved around the room. But it's still here. Julian nodded. Yes. My name is still on the deed. Yes. The spring is mine. Yes. Clover is still annoying. From outside came a loud moo. Julian looked toward the door. Apparently, Elowen laughed, then cried harder. Julian stepped closer. This time, he did not touch her until she reached for him. Elowen wrapped both arms around his waist and rested her face against his chest. He held her. No urgency, no pity. No need to fix what she was feeling. When the tears finally slowed, Elowen pulled back. I must look terrible. Julian considered this. Little red around the nose. She slapped his arm. He smiled. Elowen stared at him. What? You smiled? I do that. Rarely. Maybe I need practice. Her heartbeat changed. The room grew very quiet. Julian looked at her. Elowen. Yes? I want to say something, and I'm not very good at saying things. I noticed. He ignored that. I don't want you thinking what happened between us was because you needed somewhere to stay. She looked down. I know. Do you? She hesitated. Julian continued. I liked you when you told Cal cows don't write letters. A laugh escaped her. That's your moment, apparently. Romantic. I'm trying. Poorly. I know. His face softened. I liked you when you argued about wages. I liked you when you told me my feed shed was rotting. I liked you when you were angry. I liked you when you cried and didn't want anybody to know. Elowen's smile disappeared. Julian spoke carefully. And I like you standing here now. She could barely breathe. He looked straight into her gray-green eyes. Not because you survived. His voice lowered. Because you're you. Elowen swallowed. For years, compliments about her body had always sounded like arguments. You're beautiful despite. You're attractive for. I don't mind. Every kind word carried an invisible condition. Julian offered none. Elowen whispered, You know people will talk. They're talented that way. They'll say I'm after your ranch. Then you'll have 2 properties. She laughed. They'll say you feel sorry for me. I have plenty of people to feel sorry for. Cal's near the top. Julian. He became serious. Let them. Elowen looked toward the window. Snow drifted across the yard. I spent a long time believing being loved meant I had to become easier to love. Julian waited. Smaller, quieter, less difficult. Her eyes returned to him. I don't know how to stop thinking that. You don't have to stop tonight. Something in her chest loosened. That was Julian. He never demanded that healing perform on command. He simply left room for it. Elowen moved closer. May I ask you something? Anything. Are you ever going to kiss me? Julian blinked. Was planning to. When? Thought I'd wait for a clear invitation. She tilted her head. Julian Sorrell, if you wait for anything clearer, I may have to put it in writing. That rare smile appeared again. Then, he kissed her, softly, slowly. There was no dramatic sweep of music, no sudden transformation, no sense that Elowen had finally been chosen and therefore made worthy. She had already chosen herself. That was why the kiss felt different from every dream she once had. It did not rescue her. It met her. Winter settled over Marris spring. Life became ordinary again, which, after everything, felt miraculous. Elowen repaired fences. She argued with suppliers. She helped Julian redesign his grazing rotation for spring. He repaired her porch steps after she complained they were uneven. She accused him of looking for excuses to visit. He admitted nothing. Cal occasionally rode over carrying messages that could easily have been sent through anyone else. Elowen suspected Julian paid him. Cal denied it badly. In town, people changed. Some because they were ashamed. Some because Elowen's victory made respecting her fashionable. She knew the difference. She no longer needed everyone to like her. That surprised her. For most of her life, rejection had felt dangerous. Now it simply felt informative. One snowy morning, Elowen entered Fenwick's store. Conversation paused. Old instinct tightened her stomach. Then she remembered the courtroom. She remembered her own voice. She walked to the counter. I need flour. Fenwick nodded. How much? £20. He hesitated. then asked, "Anything else?" Elowen looked at the shelves. Coffee. He gathered the items. No comments, no strange smiles. At the door, a young woman approached Elowen. She was perhaps 18, round-faced, heavy, nervous. Elowen recognized her as the daughter of a seamstress. "Mrs. Marris?" "Yes?" The girl lowered her voice. "I read what you said in court." Elowen waited. The girl's cheeks reddened. "My mother says I should lose weight before any decent man will marry me." Elowen felt an old ache. The girl continued quickly. "I know that's foolish. I shouldn't have said anything." "No." Elowen looked at her carefully. "It's not foolish." The girl swallowed. "Do you think she's right?" Elowen considered the answer. Outside, snow fell gently across the street. She could have told the girl she was beautiful. Perhaps that would have helped. But Elowen had learned something deeper. You do not have to earn the right to be treated kindly. The girl's eyes filled. Elowen continued, "And any man who believes your body determines whether you deserve respect is telling you something about himself, not about you." The girl nodded. "Thank you." Elowen touched her arm. "Don't spend your whole life becoming smaller for rooms that should have made more space." The girl smiled. Elowen left the store. Julian waited beside the wagon. What took so long? Giving bad advice to young people. Good hobby. He helped place the flower in back. Elowen raised an eyebrow. "I can lift that." "I know." "Then why did you?" "Because I was standing here." Simple. That was another thing she had learned. Accepting help was not the same as surrendering strength. Sometimes love was a man lifting a flour sack because he happened to have 2 free hands. Spring came late. Snow retreated into the high ridges. Marris Spring ran strong with cold water. New grass covered the pasture where the boundary posts had been returned to their proper place. One April morning, Elowen stood beside the spring with Julian. Clover grazed nearby. "You ever think about selling?" Julian asked. Elowen stared at him. "My land? No." "Good. The cow." Elowen looked at Clover. "Absolutely not. She hates me. She has excellent judgment." Julian sighed. They stood quietly. Downhill, water ran toward the neighboring grazing routes. For years, Elowen had thought of the spring as Thomas's. Then theirs. Then something people wanted to steal. Now it was simply water again. Useful, clear, moving forward. Julian took her hand. Elowen looked at their fingers together. His rough, hers rougher than most women in town. She smiled. "Do you know what I thought when I first walked onto your ranch?" "What?" "That you were going to take Clover and put me in the barn." "I considered the barn." She looked offended. "For the cow." "Better." He squeezed her hand. "What did you think of me?" Julian was quiet. Elowen nudged him. "Come on." He looked toward the mountains. "I thought you looked tired." "That's all?" "And angry. I was freezing. And stubborn. 4 miles. And smart." She smiled. "How quickly did you get to smart?" "About 5 minutes." "Before or after the hemlock?" "After." "Typical man." Julian laughed. Elowen watched him. Then she looked across her land. The storm had changed nearly everything. It had torn away her roof, forced her from home, put her pride in the mud, exposed enemies she had never known existed. But it had also forced open a life she had been living too narrowly. Before the storm, Elowen survived by keeping her world small. She worked. Slept, remembered Thomas. Avoided town when possible. Accepted loneliness as the price of peace. She thought dignity meant needing nobody. She had been wrong. Dignity was not isolation. It was choice. It was accepting help without becoming someone's possession. It was loving without shrinking. It was standing before a room full of people who had judged her and refusing to become cruel simply because they had been cruel first. Gideon Barlow eventually stood trial. Samuel Dorr testified against him. More records surfaced. More families came forward. The scheme reached farther than anyone expected. Elowen attended only the first day. She had no desire to watch a man's downfall become entertainment. People found this strange. "You don't want to see him punished?" Margaret asked. They had slowly begun speaking again. Elowen considered it. I want the law to stop him. That's punishment. Maybe, she looked across her kitchen, but I don't want to build my life around watching him lose his. Margaret nodded. You're kinder than I am. No. Elowen smiled faintly. I am busy. And she was. There were fences to mend, seed to buy, a barn door to replace, a spring channel to reinforce. Julian had ordered 2 new dairy cows and somehow convinced himself this meant Elowen should advise him indefinitely. She charged him. He complained. She raised the price. By summer, people stopped calling her the Marris widow. They started calling the place Marris Farm. It was a small difference. Elowen noticed. One evening, she stood on her repaired porch as sunset poured orange light over the mountains. None Julian rode up. He dismounted, carrying something behind his back. Elowen narrowed her eyes. What did you break? Nothing. What did Cal break? Nothing. What do you want? Suspicious woman. Experienced woman. He climbed the steps, then revealed a wooden sign. Elowen stared. Marris Spring. The letters were carved deeply into pine. She touched them. What's this? Boundary marker. I already have markers. This one's harder to move. Her throat tightened. Julian set it against the porch wall. I thought we could put it by the north road. We? If you're accepting volunteers. Elowen looked at him. I might. They carried the sign together. At the roadside, Julian dug the hole. Elowen steadied the post. When it stood straight, they stepped back. Marris Spring. Her name, her water, her home. Nothing hidden. Nothing borrowed. Nothing owed. Elowen rested one hand on the sign. Julian stood beside her. She remembered the woman who had walked through freezing rain months earlier. Wet, ashamed, terrified of becoming a burden. That woman had believed she was arriving at Sorrell Ranch to trade away the last valuable thing she owned. She had been wrong about that too. The cow was not the last valuable thing. Neither was the land. Elowen herself had value before anyone recognized it, before Julian, before the courtroom, before the town changed its mind. That was the hardest truth she had ever learned, because society had spent years teaching her the opposite. The mountain breeze lifted loose strands of her chestnut hair. Julian looked at the sign. Crooked. Elowen stepped back. It is not. Little to the left. You dug the hole. You held the post. So this is somehow my fault? I didn't say fault. Move it yourself. Julian laughed. Elowen smiled. Then he reached for her hand. The sun slipped lower behind the mountains, turning the spring to gold. The woman people once whispered about stood beside the land they had tried to take from her. She was still heavy, still scarred by grief, still sometimes tired, still occasionally hurt by cruel words. Love had not changed her body. Victory had not erased old pain. Justice had not made the world suddenly kind. But Elowen no longer mistook other people's cruelty for truth. She no longer believed being alone made her strong, or being loved made her weak. She understood that a person's dignity did not increase when society approved of them, and it did not disappear when society laughed. It had always been hers. The storm had taken a roof. Greed had nearly taken the land. Rumor had tried to take her name, but none of them had taken Elowen Marris, and in the end, that was why they lost.